Hello, sweetheart. Have you ever been erased from a room without anyone touching you? That was my daughter's birthday gift to me. She was turning 36. I'd spent all week preparing, baking her favorite poppy seed cake, ironing the good tablecloth, wrapping the little charm bracelet I found at the antique store in gold tissue. I wanted the day to feel special, not because of the gifts, but because I still believed, perhaps foolishly, that a mother's effort still mattered. The house was full, balloons in the doorway, laughter rising from the patio. I stayed mostly in the kitchen, slicing fruit, refilling drinks. I was the invisible rhythm behind the celebration, and I didn't mind. Not at first. It was only when I brought out the cake, candles lit and glowing, that I felt the air shift. Everyone gathered around, phones out, smiles posed. She closed her eyes and made a wish, then looked straight at me as the applause died. "The best gift," she said, tilting her head with a smile too sharp to be kind, "would be for you to be gone." Gone. The word didn't register at first. I thought I'd misheard, thought it was a joke that missed its mark. But then the laughter picked up again, and no one else seemed shocked. Not her husband, not her friends, not even her younger brother, who stood near the patio door, chewing a piece of melon. She blew out the candles. The room flickered. I stood there holding the knife, still warm from the drawer, and felt the heat drain from my cheeks. A joke, I told myself. A poor one, but a joke nonetheless. I set the cake down and stepped back. They didn't notice. I was no longer a guest. I was staff. No, not even that. I was heir. Have you ever realized your own child is capable of cruelty wrapped in charm? In that moment, I did. And so, I vanished. I walked to the front door, past the heap of coats on the hall bench, and slipped out without a word. No one called after me. No one asked where I'd gone. I left the candles burning and the cake untouched. I didn't even take my coat. The street outside was quiet, the kind of quiet you only notice when your heart is pounding like a drum. I walked, past hedges I'd helped plant, past neighbors I'd once known. I walked like a woman untethered from the world, my shoes soft against the sidewalk, my thoughts louder than any voice. Gone. She had said it so easily. And the worst part? It wasn't the first time she'd wanted me gone. Not truly. But it was the first time she'd said it out loud, in front of people, with witnesses, with no shame. I ended up at the park, the old one near the edge of town with the bench under the linden tree. I sat there for a long time, hours maybe, watching children who weren't mine, listening to the rustle of leaves above my head, wondering where I'd lost her, wondering when love had turned into resentment. I took out my phone eventually, not to check messages, there were none, but to open the voice memo app. And I said it, out loud. My daughter wished me gone today, so I'm granting her wish. I don't know what this means yet, but I'm going to find out. And that's where this story begins. Not with her words, but with my silence and what I chose to do with it. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into a roadside inn on the edge of town, the kind with floral bedspreads and mismatched lamps, where no one asks questions and the coffee tastes like burnt possibility. Room 204. That's where I vanished. No suitcase, no plan, just the clothes on my back and a handbag filled with decades of loyalty that no one wanted. Lying in that stiff bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she looked at me with kindness. My daughter, Elena. She used to grip my hand so tight crossing the street, like the world would swallow her whole if I let go. She'd climb into bed with me during thunderstorms, whispering, "You smell like home." What happened to that little girl? She had fire in her. I always said that. "You're fierce like your grandmother," I told her once, when she was 10 and chased a boy down for stealing her pencil case. She'd puffed up like a lion, but somehow that fire got twisted, hardened, used against me. I spent the next morning walking the streets of a town I no longer recognized, seeing faces that once knew mine and now only nodded with vague politeness. I stopped by the library, sat in the same seat I'd used to help Elena with her homework. Back then, she wanted to be a writer. She filled journals with stories about flying horses and sea kingdoms. She doesn't write anymore. She became something else, someone else. She got polished, married well, learned how to wield smiles like scalpels, and somewhere along the line, I stopped being her lighthouse and became her embarrassment. I kept playing the birthday moment over in my head, the delivery of it, the cruelty wrapped in confetti, how no one flinched. That was what gutted me, the absence of shock. As if I'd been a burden for so long that wishing me gone was the most natural gift in the world. But it wasn't just the party. There had been signs. I just didn't want to read them. Like last Christmas when she told me not to wear my house sweater because it looked too lived in, or the time she corrected my pronunciation of quinoa in front of her friends, laughing like I was a toddler in a high chair. There was always an edge to her now, something hard beneath the gloss, and I kept excusing it. She's stressed, she's tired, she doesn't mean it like that, but she did. She meant every word. I sat on a park bench outside the inn that evening and called my sister Ruth. She lives 2 states away, in a little cottage with too many cats and a fireplace that smokes. We hadn't talked in 6 months. My daughter always said Ruth was too messy for our holiday table. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Helen?" The sound of her voice was a balm I didn't know I needed. I didn't cry. Not then. I just told her everything. The birthday, the cake, the word. Gone. She was quiet for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. Maybe disappearing isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning of being seen again, by the right people. I stayed quiet. Let her words settle like dust on old wood. She offered to come get me. I said no. Not yet. First, I needed to do something, not for Elena, not for show, for me. The next day I went home, but not like they expected. I pulled up to the house just after dusk. The porch light was on, still set to the timer I installed years ago. The rose bush by the stairs, one I planted when Elena got her first job, was overgrown now, thorny and untamed. I didn't knock. I didn't step inside. I walked around the house to the back garden. My garden, the place I used to find my breath again when the world got too loud. I took out a small notebook from my purse, the kind with the faded cover and soft pages worn from use. And I began to write. Not a goodbye note, not an explanation, a declaration. This is where I begin again. I will not ask to be wanted. I will not beg to be noticed. I am not the ghost in this house. I am the woman who built it. Then I placed the notebook on the garden table, the one where I used to sip tea while she told me about her dreams before they became weapons. And I walked away again. This time, not in sadness, in purpose. Do you know what happens when you vanish on purpose? People don't come looking for you, not right away, not if they never really saw you in the first place. 3 days passed. I waited. Not because I wanted them to beg, I was long past that kind of fantasy, but because I needed to know what silence revealed. My phone stayed cold and still, no missed calls, no texts, just a few bank notifications and a weather alert about incoming rain. My daughter, my only daughter, didn't check if I was alive. It wasn't until the 4th morning, when I opened my inbox, that I saw it. A message, not from Elena, from her husband. Subject line, concerned. 3 words in the body. Have you seen Helen? That was all. Not, is she all right? Not, she left her coat. Not, please tell her we're worried. Just that sterile question, the kind you send about a misplaced umbrella. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the email, folded it neatly, and slid it into the back of my journal. Evidence, not for a court, for me. Proof of what I'd been to them, a person-shaped object, useful, silent, replaceable. I stayed with Ruth for a while after that. Her guest room was dusty and smelled faintly of lavender and cats, but it felt like a sanctuary. We cooked meals together, real ones with butter and laughter and dishes that didn't match. She didn't ask for stories I wasn't ready to tell. She just let me exist. Do you know how rare that is? To be allowed to just exist? One evening, while we were watching old movies and crocheting, poorly in my case, Ruth asked the question I'd been dreading. "What do you want to do now, Helen?" It shouldn't have been terrifying, but it was, because no one had asked me that in over a decade, not since Frank died. After that, it was always, "What does Elena need? What do the grandkids want? Can you help with this? Could you just babysit? Could you cover that flight?" What I wanted became the whisper at the end of every sentence, one that never got spoken. I looked at my sister. "I want to matter again." She didn't flinch. She just nodded and said, "Then let's make that happen." The next day, I rented a small apartment, just one bedroom and a tiny balcony overlooking a street with too many potholes and a coffee shop run by a woman who called everyone darlin'. I furnished it myself. Second-hand furniture, thrift store paintings, one perfect rocking chair. I painted the walls a soft yellow. It didn't match anything, but it felt like sunlight. I didn't tell Elena where I was. I didn't even leave a forwarding address. I wanted to see if she'd bother to find it herself. She didn't. What did arrive, weeks later, was a card. The kind people buy in a rush when guilt outweighs effort. On the front, a watercolor bouquet. Inside, "Sorry if I hurt your feelings. You're always welcome at the house. Love, E. If, always welcome." That's the trick of someone who never plans to change. They shift the weight of the harm onto the reaction, if you felt hurt, if you took it wrong. Not, "I did wrong." I set the card on the windowsill where it curled from the sun. I didn't answer. I wouldn't play the game where she got to wound and then control the healing. But something inside me cracked, not in pain, in strength. I started writing again. Not fiction like I used to dream about, not memoir either. No, I began writing letters to other women like me, women erased by love, forgotten by the very people they fed, clothed, raised. I printed them out and mailed them, old school, one envelope at a time. Some went to senior centers, others to community groups, a few to names I found in comment sections of articles about loneliness. And then letters came back, from Florida, from Maine, from a woman named Beryl who wrote in all caps and sent me tea bags taped to her note. "You made me feel like I wasn't crazy," one woman wrote. Another said, "Your words reached me in the waiting room of a doctor's office, and I cried in public for the first time in years. I called the project the Vanishing Point, because that's where we begin, and it's where we rise. I'd never felt more alive." And then, one night, I opened my mailbox and saw an envelope addressed in Elena's handwriting. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a wedding invitation. Not hers, her daughter's, my granddaughter, my sweet, awkward Emma, who once baked cookies with me and cried when her cat died. She was getting married, and I hadn't even known she was engaged. At the bottom of the invitation was a handwritten note, "Hope you'll come." It would mean a lot to Emma. Please don't make it about the past. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a subtle reminder of my place. Come, smile, be quiet, be useful in silence. I stared at the invitation for a long time, and then I made a decision, one that would change everything. The wedding was scheduled for June 15th, a Saturday. Garden venue, cream and blush palette. I read the invitation over and over, each time feeling less like a guest and more like an afterthought. Please don't make it about the past. That line stuck like a thorn under my rib. I hadn't been invited to a life event. I'd been summoned to keep the peace, smile in photos, stay quiet, sit where they place me. They wanted the illusion of a mother, a grandmother, not the truth of me. But I wasn't the same woman who sliced birthday cake while being wished into non-existence. That Helen had left the party. This Helen, she was ready. I bought a dress. Not beige, not navy, not something safe that blended into the chairs. It was deep plum velvet, second-hand, tailored to my shape with sleeves that made me feel regal and strong. I looked in the mirror and whispered, "If they want presents, I'll give them presents." When I arrived at the venue, the air was thick with perfume and peonies. Young people in designer suits floated between tables, sipping champagne and talking about things that meant nothing. A string quartet played under the tent. And there, across the lawn, stood my daughter, Elena. She wore a slate blue gown, elegant, understated, controlled. Our eyes met. I smiled softly. She didn't smile back. Instead, she walked toward me with that clipped gait she used when she was trying not to look flustered. "Mother," she said quietly, "you got the note." "I did," I said. She glanced over her shoulder, where a photographer was arranging Emma's bridesmaids into a sun-drenched row. "Please don't make today complicated. Emma just wants it to be smooth." "Of course," I said gently. "But complicated doesn't always come from the person you expect." She stiffened. We didn't say anything else. She walked away, already done with me. I stood alone by the koi pond, clutching my purse like a lifeline, wondering if I'd made a mistake coming. And then, "Grandma?" Emma's voice. She looked radiant, nervous, but real. She didn't have the sharpness of her mother. Her eyes were her father's, kind, searching. "I'm so glad you came," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "I wasn't sure you would, after everything." I held her tighter than I meant to. "I wouldn't have missed it, sweetheart." And I meant it. She leaned back, looked at me like she was trying to memorize my face. "I missed you." It cracked something open in me I didn't know was still tender. We talked for only a few minutes, but it was enough. She knew. She saw me. And it gave me the strength I needed to sit through the ceremony, through the speeches, through the glances from Elena's circle. But the moment that changed everything came at dinner. I had just taken a bite of salmon when Elena's voice echoed across the table. "We're so proud of Emma," she said, lifting her glass. "She's always been the heart of this family. And today, with everyone here, we're reminded of what really matters: unity, tradition, and knowing when to pass the torch gracefully." She looked right at me as she said it. Everyone turned, smiling, applauding. They thought it was just a toast. But I heard the message. "Pass the torch, Helen. Retire from relevance." I stood, not angrily, not loudly, just with purpose. "I'd like to say something," I said, my voice steady. The clinking of silverware stopped. A few heads turned. Elena froze. "I've been part of this family for 72 years, I said. "I've held babies, wiped tears, cooked meals, paid tuition, and buried secrets no one else dared name." A quiet ripple of discomfort moved across the table. "But I've also learned something else, that sometimes when a woman vanishes from her own life, she doesn't disappear. She just steps back far enough to see the whole picture." I paused, scanning the faces, some confused, some riveted. "Elena," I said, turning toward my daughter, "I'm not here to complicate things. I'm here to honor the truth. You raised a beautiful daughter, and I'm proud of her, but I won't be erased to make the story cleaner." Emma reached for my hand under the table. Her grip was strong, defiant. The silence was deafening. I raised my glass. "To the next generation," I said softly, "and to the women who taught them strength, even if they never said thank you." And then I sat. The table didn't applaud, but Emma didn't let go of my hand. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt unignorable. Later that evening, as the party dimmed and fairy lights twinkled in the hedges, Elena approached me again. But this time, her mask cracked. "You had to do it, had to make it about you," she hissed. I met her gaze calmly. "No, darling, I made it about truth. That's what mothers do, even when it hurts." She blinked fast. "You humiliated me." "No," I said. "I reminded you I exist." She turned on her heel, walked away, her heels clicking like punctuation. But I didn't chase her. I walked back to the koi pond, where Emma was standing barefoot, heels in one hand, sipping lemonade. "You were brilliant," she said, eyes shining, "and brave." "No," I corrected gently, "just finally done hiding." We stood in silence, the pond rippling under moonlight, and I knew something had shifted. The house of mirrors she built couldn't hold me anymore. I didn't cry when I hung up the phone. I didn't shout. I didn't even shake. I just sat there, alone, in my little yellow-walled apartment, with the quiet weight of finality pressing gently on my shoulders. Elena's voice still echoed in my ear, cold, calculated. "If you don't stop this, I'll make sure no one in this town takes you seriously again." That was her parting threat. Not "I'm sorry" or "I didn't realize." Not "What did I do to hurt you so deeply?" Just a warning, just control. Still. But something had shifted in me, far beyond what she could touch. I didn't fear her anymore. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote one final letter. Not to her, not to the publisher, not to the women who'd been sending me their beautiful, trembling thank you notes. I wrote it to myself. "Helen, you kept asking what you did wrong. You raised her, you softened for her, you swallowed your voice so hers could echo louder. But you didn't do anything wrong, dear heart. You just kept showing up for someone who had long since walked away. You can stop now. Not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but because your love no longer requires silence to survive. Let her go." And I did. That night, I slept without dreams. And in the days that followed, something strange began to happen. I felt light, not happy exactly, not joyful, but free. Emma came over on a Tuesday. She brought cinnamon rolls and a stack of thank you notes from readers who had sent them to her campus mailbox. She said, "They wrote to you but didn't know where to send them. I couldn't let them go unread." We sat on the floor, passing them back and forth. One read, "I never saw my own silence until you put it into words. Now I'm speaking. My daughter is listening. Thank you for breaking the pattern." Another simply said, "You saved me." And maybe I did. Maybe not in the heroic way. Maybe not with fire or fury, but with truth. Quiet, steady, relentless truth. Emma curled up beside me and rested her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said, "Mom's still telling everyone you're exaggerating." "I'm sure she is," I said. "Does it bother you?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No, because I'm not writing to her anymore." She looked up. "Then who?" "To the women like me, who gave until they disappeared, who stayed in rooms where no one looked at them, who asked for permission to be loved." Emma nodded, her eyes soft. "I think it's working," she whispered, and I believed her. Later that month, the bookstore downtown asked if I'd like to teach a writing circle, just small, for women over 60. I said yes. We called it Letters to the Life I Forgot I Deserved. 12 women came that first week, some shy, some furious. One brought a binder labeled My Unsent Thoughts. Another cried the moment she read her first sentence aloud. By spring, we needed a second table. By summer, a second class. And one day, a woman I'd never met stopped me on the sidewalk. She was holding my book, bent corners, Post-it notes peeking out like leaves. "Are you Helen?" I nodded. She touched her heart and said, "You made me feel like I wasn't crazy." I smiled, touched her arm, and said, "You were never crazy, darling. You were just unheard." And in that moment, I knew. I hadn't vanished. I had emerged, not smaller, not softer, but finally, whole. The lawsuit threat faded, just like her presence in my life. And that's all right. Sometimes you don't reconcile with those who hurt you. Sometimes you simply stop handing them the pen, and you write the ending yourself.